You're listening to The Luxury Item, the podcast on the business of luxury and the people and companies that are shaping the future of the luxury industry. Here's your host, Scott Kerr.
Somewhere along the way, I stopped asking what hotels wanted of me and started learning what I wanted from them. In particular, great style and those thoughtful services that make you feel looked after when you're thousands of miles from home and discombobulated by the time change and not looking forward to tomorrow's meetings. I still get a thrill when at the peninsula in Hong Kong or Shanghai or Beijing, my shoes come back not just with a shine, but with monogrammed shoe trees. I still swoon when I notice someone has brought a fashion editor's eye to the staff uniforms. I'm looking at you, Rosewood London, with those tartan waistcoats. And when I glance around my house today, I can spot all renovation ideas and decorating moves I've taken from hotels the world over. The bar setup I copied from Villa Veltrinelli on the shore of Lake Garda. The artist I discovered at Bahia Vic in Uruguay. The Indian-inspired nook in my bookcase populated with bits and bobs acquired at the Oberoys and Tages across the subcontinent. That was an excerpt from a piece that my guest today on The Luxury Item recently wrote in Departures magazine. The piece was about his long love for luxury hotels and some of the properties that stand out in his mind. He is likely not alone in his thoughts, as many world travelers are anxious to someday move beyond rediscovering their own backyards and start building unforgettable travel memories. The scars inflicted by COVID-19 on travel and tourism look to be permanent as companies shift away from massive travel budgets and experiential living becomes a memory. Countless luxury hotels around the world have been dealing with canceled reservations, lost revenue, and not knowing how long the coronavirus pandemic will wreak havoc on the world. As hotels have been cautiously reopening, health and safety concerns is now paramount for both travelers and properties. My guest today on The Luxury Item is Nathan Lump. He is the Vice President of Consumer Marketing at the Expedia Group, one of the world's leading online travel brands. Nathan leads Expedia's consumer marketing organization. Prior to joining Expedia, Nathan was editorial director for the luxury and lifestyle group at Time Inc., where he managed the performance of a portfolio of premium brands, including Travel and Leisure, Departures, Food and Wine, Southern Living, Coastal Living, Sunset, and others. He was also Travel and Leisure's editor-in-chief. Nathan also spent time at Condé Nast leading editorial and strategic direction for brands like Condé Nast Traveler. As a matter of fact, Nathan and I worked together at Time Inc., and I can tell you, aside from being a travel industry and luxury expert, he has an incredible grasp of global trends in behavior and consumption. He's here to talk about the future of luxury travel in a complex world, and maybe he'll even share a couple of luxury stories along the way. Welcome to The Luxury Item, Nathan.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're on the show. I know you're out in Seattle and you moved there a bunch of months ago. And to me, you're a New Yorker, and I would love to know how it's been since you've moved to Seattle. Obviously, you didn't expect to see what happened in the last 4 months ago, but very interesting to hear before we kind of jump into things, how things have been going in Seattle since you moved out there.
Yeah, it's obviously been a strange time to be a newcomer to a place. People ask me, how do you like Seattle? And my answer is, I don't really know, because I haven't really explored the city that much at this point. We moved here towards the end of last year, and we moved into, lockdown pretty early here in the city. But, overall, so far so good. It's been a strange time to be away from New York as well, and seeing all the things happening there in this period. I feel very close to New York and to a lot of people there, but we've got a lovely place here, and the Pacific Northwest weather has been lovely this summer, and so no complaints. It's just an unusual time to not know your way around.
And I think your piece in Departures was so timely, and I really enjoyed it. On the transformative power of checking into a luxury hotel. It was really heartfelt to me. So what inspired you to write it?
To be totally honest, I was asked to write it. Not exactly. I was asked to write an essay about hotels. I used to be the editorial director of Departures, and so I know the team there very well. They were in the midst.
Was this pre-pandemic?
No, it was during the pandemic. Right. So they were producing that issue. They have a hotels themed issue that they were producing kind of at the height of the pandemic. And, naturally for a travel brand, it's a little bit challenging for all the travel brands today, because some of the kind of classic stuff that you produce, you can't actually do right now. So they wanted to have an essay for the book, that was, just dealing with the idea of, what makes hotels special and what do we love about them. And so I sort of took that guidance and ran with it in terms of reflecting on, what hotels have meant to me. And, for anyone who reads the piece, it's clear that hotels have been a really important, part of my education in a way, and
Right.
And have been very sustaining to me over the years. And I consider myself a student of hospitality still,
Right.
and I love that sense of possibility that you can get from things. But it was a really wonderful. It was a lot of fun to put that piece together, because of course it was also, I was reflecting on great experiences and on travel at a time when, I myself and many others, haven't been doing that, which is
Right.
in and of itself an unusual thing for me. I have not gone this long without getting on a plane or checking into a hotel in at least 25 years.
Oh my God.
And it's weird.
I can imagine.
To say the least.
It's you name dropped a bunch of great hotels in
Mm.
that piece. How did you choose those hotels? You
Mm.
stayed in so many luxury hotels around the world. How did you pick those? And it seems like the ones that you did pick have influenced you in your own personal life.
Yeah, I kind of worked backwards from memories, in a sense, and just, memories that stood out to me, places that, because obviously, as you say, I mean, I've stayed in so many wonderful, wonderful hotels,
Yeah.
and, I mean, it's the great good fortune of my life. And, but obviously some, you have personal memories that attach to some more than others. And that was really kind of how and there's so many more I could have included. I mean, I
Of
have,
course.
endless number of these kinds of memories, but yeah, but I was really trying to touch on, ones that, that I had some attachment to at some particular time in my life. And it was sort of a random collection that way, but I kind of like how the mix that came out of that.
Yeah. What was your favorite hotel stay?
Oh my gosh,
Let's specifically
Scott. I
let's
mean,
stick with luxury hotels.
Scott,
I know
yeah,
there's a
well,
lot, but is there
um,
one that kind of sticks out to you?
um, look, many of the ones, obviously, I don't have a single favorite, I will say, and that would be impossible for me to say. It's like, I have a friend who writes about wine, and he always says, don't ask me what my favorite wine is, because like I write about wine because I love wine. I've got so many anyway. But truly, so I don't have a single favorite, but there are a lot of the ones that I wrote about are very special to me. But I will say one I can share that I didn't write about in the piece, for just to provide maybe something different for those who've read it or will read it, is that I have a special memory of the Zamangiri, right here in the United States,
Yep.
in Utah. And I had Amangiri is for anyone who knows it. I mean, it's an incredibly just beautiful property.
Right.
Super zen and minimal, and like in the high desert of southern Utah. And I had this experience where I was in Los Angeles for business meetings, and I was at a time in my life when I was really feeling pretty burnt out, and just having just in need of kind of some restoration, basically. And
Right.
I was in LA for meetings, and I was about to leave, and I looked at my schedule for the rest of the week, and it was kind of lighter than usual. And I thought, you know what, maybe I can take a few days and go somewhere. And so I basically I called up on McGeary, and I booked myself in there, and I changed my ticket, and I told my husband I wasn't coming home for a few more days, and I flew to Vegas, and then drove for a number of hours, because it's quite far, to that place. And I told the team that I basically didn't want to talk to anyone while I was there. I was editor-in-chief of Travel and Leisure at the time, and you tend to get a little fussed over when you show up at great hotels, and I appreciate that. But I really wasn't what I wanted, and I have to say I was really impressed. The team like completely left me alone, which was exactly what I wanted, and I basically spent 4 days not talking to another human being and just kind of communing with nature and the kind of incredible sense of peace in that property. And I think one of the things that, I think of still today when I think of that stay is that, luxury means a lot of different things. And sometimes, and obviously that the property itself is luxurious in a lot of the ways that we think of luxury. But sometimes luxury is about something like peace and quiet and serenity and having access to an environment where you can feel that spirit. And for me, that's what made that stay so special. And that was the incredible luxury that property delivered to me, was that it gave me something that I needed in that moment and that was very hard for me to find anywhere.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's one that I remember very very strongly.
So when it comes to travel, what does luxury mean to you?
Well, it means a lot of different things, but for me, luxury fundamentally is about having access to things, and when I say things, I don't necessarily mean tangible things, that are perhaps more special than what you experience in your everyday. And so that can be about comfort, or it can be about service, but it can be, as I was just saying, it can also be about environment, it can be about a mood, but that fundamentally for me, it's about kind of a step change from what your daily life looks like, and in a way that is positive and that you appreciate, and so in that sense it's also very personal. What is luxury to me is not necessarily going to be luxury to you, and so, that's not a very perhaps satisfying answer because it's not very concrete, but it, I think it is for me the philosophical idea for me behind luxury.
Right. That makes sense. So let's shift to the industry. Being in Expedia and have been in the thick of the travel industry for a very long time.
Yeah.
I know the overall travel booking numbers have been brutal in second quarter, especially in the early days of the outbreak. Now we're seeing people are slowly starting to be part of the world again. And, once the vaccine is developed, do you see a big rebound in travel? And while we're talking about Expedia, what is Expedia doing to prepare for that rebound?
So yes, I mean, I believe that travel will come back in a big way, but I actually don't. It is my personal belief that I don't think travel will come back in a big way until we do have a, widely available effective vaccine or treatment. I think as long as that's not the case, and the virus is still, with us and people are still getting sick and dying, I think that will put a damper on travel, even if things are not as bad as they were at the height of the crisis. And we're seeing that right now where travel has rebounded some, and people are traveling to some extent and they are moving around, and there's a lot of variation by market. Our business at Expedia is truly global. And so, we're seeing the patterns in, every major travel market in the world. And there is not insignificant variation between those markets, but everywhere, demand is not what it was prior to the rise of the pandemic. And so, but I do believe that I think we'll see actually once we reach that point, I think there'll be tremendous pent-up demand, and there'll be I hope, and I think there'll be a big comeback across the industry. In terms of what we're doing to prepare, there's a lot of so we're obviously, at Expedia, my current role, we're a technology company that plays in the travel space, right? And one of the things that we're really doing in this period have been doing is taking the opportunity to make a lot of improvements, kind of back end improvements, things that necessarily, our customers, consumers don't necessarily see, but that increase our ability to serve them better. And improving things like functionality, how we deliver service, the ways in which we're utilizing technology to hopefully create better customer experiences. And some of those things in a normal business environment can be hard to justify, spending a lot of time on, because they don't necessarily drive immediate business results, but they're important. And we're kind of taking the opportunity, while business is a little bit softer, to make an investment in some of those areas. And I would say that's probably the overarching biggest thing that we're doing now, is to try to, kind of lay that foundation for, being better, kind of across the board when that moment comes, so that we're, in a position to both hopefully better capture that demand, but also, deliver a better customer experience for the folks who come back to us.
Right. So who do you think is going to start traveling first when that happens? Is it going to be the high net worth travelers? They are still traveling to some degree and have the means to do so, and they have that flexibility. So do you see this audience being the first ones to travel, come back?
Yeah. I think that they will be among the first, probably, and we're already seeing some evidence of that, as you say. I don't think it'll be exclusively that group, in the sense that I think what we're seeing, at least, is that it has to do in some ways with risk profile, basically. So, I think it stands to reason that your high-end customer will be among the first to come back, partially because they're better traveled, and therefore kind of, feel more comfortable with the travel experience broadly, which creates a higher degree of confidence. And then also from a financial perspective, they're less concerned about the risks that would come if, they make a booking and ultimately can't travel, and they might lose some money attached to that. Like, that's not as much of a concern for that customer. So, but on the flip side, you have, let's say, younger people who might not spend as much money, might not, have as much disposable income or fit the profile of a luxury traveler, but they also might also fit sort of a certain sort of risk profile, in the sense that they might just not be as worried about their health, or worried about what would happen to them if they got stranded somewhere. And so they too, I think, would be, good candidates for coming back sooner. So and obviously, at a company like Expedia, we serve both ends of that market. So, we're looking for all the pockets of potential demand. But yes, but I think you're absolutely right. Your hypothesis, I think, is, rings very true to me. And I think, and as I said, we're already seeing some evidence of that certainly that your high end, your luxury traveler is definitely going to have a higher degree of resilience.
And I know you've been looking at the data at Expedia to see who's, traveling now and who's getting themselves out into the world again. Are you seeing anything interesting or anything surprising?
There's nothing particularly surprising. What I would say is, which I alluded to already, is that there is not insignificant market variation. So Europe, is, and this won't come as any surprise to folks who've been looking at this closely, but Europe is doing better in terms of people, returning, albeit cautiously, to to certain kinds of travel. There's definitely more movement across borders, for instance, even if it is still regional on the European side than we're seeing in other parts of the world. And so, they're really, at least from our perspective, they're leading the way in terms of recovery in the travel sector. And, I think that's probably the most significant trend that I've been following, and really thinking about, how do we adapt to that, and understand that, the patterns of travel are looking different in other places. So in the US, obviously, it's still much more domestic, and even within the US, we're seeing some not insignificant variations regionally, for what I believe are different reasons in some cases. So, in the Northeast, where cases are seem to be a bit more under control, there's a higher degree of comfort emerging there, but in a strong kind of quite regional travel profile. In other parts of the country where you see cases not necessarily under control in quite the same way, but there seems to be movement happening there as well but mostly because the people don't seem to be as concerned in some ways. So anyway,
Right.
it's an interesting, there are interesting variations that are, I think, in some ways kind of cultural and regional.
Yeah. I know you were mentioning earlier that during this downtime, if you will, that Expedia is doing a lot of things behind the scenes. And, in the news, reading that they have made a bunch of more consumer facing changes in the past few months. They took down HomeAway in the US, and they folded it into this revamped vacation rental site, Vrbo.
Yeah.
It seems like vacation rentals is having its moment and thriving in the midst of this COVID calamity. Can you talk about that? Are you seeing that too?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, Vrbo is the brightest spot in our business as a group. I mean, I think most of your listeners will know this, but Expedia Group is an umbrella group of brands. Expedia is one of those brands, but we have a number of others: Travelocity, Hotels.com, Vrbo, and others. And but yes, Vrbo has been the vacation rentals has been the real bright spot and the real kind of growth area. In fact, I mean, in our business, and we're not alone in seeing that. And it makes some sense as people are kind of returning to getting out there and wanting to go places. There's something that feels a bit more secure about being in private spaces as opposed to public ones, or being able to stay within your bubble, as it were, if you're traveling with other people. And that has been a big area of focus for us. In terms of the consumer facing brands, we had actually already made the decision had already been made, for instance, with the HomeAway brand to fold the HomeAway brand into Vrbo and to go forward with one primary vacation rental brand. And the success that we saw with Vrbo and vacation rentals actually just kind of accelerated the process, but the decision had already been made to do that.
I'm personally contributing to its growth because I booked a Vrbo home in Saratoga Springs for next week. So I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, excellent.
I'm
No,
very
that's
excited
great.
about that.
I think that it makes sense that people, I think, as we're and I think hotels, by the way, will we'll see proper recovery. I don't think there's any reason to think that, consumers who prefer hotels over vacation rentals or vice versa, I don't think there's any particular reason to think that those preferences will change on a permanent basis. I think it's interesting to see that, vacation rentals are tapping into something that helps people travel more confidently right now.
Right. So from a consumer marketing standpoint, what are some of the things that you are personally working on that you can talk about at Expedia?
Yes, a lot of things. Oh my goodness. As I was alluding to earlier, if there is a silver lining to a challenging and soft business climate, it's that it does offer you the opportunity to make changes. And I'm new in my role, and saw a lot of opportunity for change. One of the things that I'm really just focused on is kind of redefining how we handle our customer communications broadly, and to try to do so in a way that is perhaps a bit more conscious of adding genuine value for the consumer at every one of our touch points. That's a real priority for me. I mean, coming out of the media business as I do, I have a very in the media business, your whole business is based on your relationship with your consumer. If people don't like what you give them, you don't have an audience, and therefore you don't have a business.
Right.
And I think commercial companies, brands can sometimes forget that it's how important it is to nurture your customer, and really make sure that you're helping them, that you're providing genuine value, that you're not just talking to them for the sake of talking to them, but that you're actually talking to them because you have something that you think would be helpful for them to hear.
Right.
And so very broadly, kind of philosophically, that's something I'm focused on is sort of kind of reforming or adjusting our customer communications. Another piece that I'm really focused on is how do we better build customer loyalty? So I oversee our rewards program for the Expedia brand, and that's something I'm putting renewed focus behind in an effort to make sure that we're also nurturing the customers who you know who've shown propensity to do business with us, and who who travel more frequently, spend more money, all those good things that are helpful for building a healthy business. So I want to make sure we really take care of those folks, and hopefully encourage more of them to exist. So those are two things I'm really focused on.
So these challenging times seem to have given us an appreciation of intrinsic luxuries in our lives, from baking sourdough bread at
Yeah,
home to spending more time with your family. So do you
totally.
think by recognizing these simple pleasures, travel at any level will become more precious and more adventurous?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting idea. I hesitate to prognosticate too much about how things will change, because who knows in some ways. But I do think that there's a possibility that, as you say, as we've kind of reconnected to some of these things and come to maybe appreciate them more than we might have in the past, that it's almost like the way we used to think about travel, that it was a very special thing, and it was a special event, and it was something that you really looked forward to, and people took longer trips, and it was more of a moment, and you carved out potentially more time for it. And I think there's a possibility, at least, that we could see a movement towards that, in some ways, kind of how we maybe how we used to think about travel more like 20 years ago than or longer, than in the last few years, when it was nothing for some people to hop on a plane and go to Paris for the weekend, or I think there might be a bit more of there might be some recalibration around that.
Before the pandemic hit, many affluent consumers were looking for more of these life-enhancing and
Yeah.
life-changing travel, where they can expect a much deeper connection with the world around them, such as witnessing the total eclipse of the sun,
Yeah.
from a luxury camp in Patagonia, or, cultural immersions in Japan during the cherry blossom seasons. Do you think that type of travel itinerary will continue in a post-COVID world?
100%. I think, I think if anything, this, just, hastens that or exacerbates that trend, reinforces it. I think people will be continuing to look ever more to travel to provide that, like, extra sense of meaning, that way of connecting to something either in themselves or something in another culture or community that that is additive and enriching to their lives. Yeah, I think there's a real possibility that this whole experience kind of makes um, makes making choices that feel consistent with your values and how you're trying to grow as an individual and contribute to society. Like, it really heightens those considerations, and I think we'll feel that in travel for sure.
I think you'll have more of these bucket list,
Yeah,
bucket list type trips for multi-generational families,
totally.
or large groups of friends who want to celebrate and reunite after not seeing each other for so long.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are definitely many of us, myself included, who haven't seen friends and family for a long time. I think there'll be a strong desire to get together. Travel will be, since we don't all live in the same places, I think travel will be a key part of that. I mean, that's also a trend that I've been following for quite some time, is this also this idea that, travel is also about carving out space in your life for quality time with the people that you love, and that's also a part of what makes travel meaningful. And I think that will be even more of an impetus, particularly in that kind of early stage of travel coming back in in hopefully a post-COVID world. But I think that's something that's intrinsically part of how we think about it now.
Yeah, and I really think, humans will want to be more mindful, and, think about sustainable travel will
Yeah.
probably continue to be a key factor in choosing these destinations. And, maybe visiting destinations and communities that need more tourism the most.
Yeah.
And more, let's say, like, taking a more compassionate approach to the travel. Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, I think, look, one of the things that is, it's not only in travel. I mean, it's in the economic rebound broadly. We're all, I think, very aware that where we start to spend our money, when we start to spend our money again in bigger and broader ways, has a significant impact on, businesses, communities, individuals. And so, yeah, being mindful about, where do you want those dollars to go? I think will be part of the equation for thoughtful consumers, and absolutely wanting to make sure that we're making choices. I mean, I think we're all very conscious of the fact, particularly, a certain kind of consumer. I think we're all very conscious of the fact that, this period has changed patterns and, in significant ways. People aren't traveling as much. And one of the things that comes out of that is that there's not as much pollution, or people aren't traveling as much. And one of the things that comes out of that is destinations that have struggled with over tourism aren't having that particular struggle right now. Do we want to go back exactly to the way things were? I think for many of us, the answer to that is not quite. That there are certain things that we do hope will go back to quote unquote normal, and there might be some things that we would like to see change. And I think people will make slightly different decisions based on that.
Yeah, and it seems like the whole desire for this quick escape seems less relevant now.
I think so. I think there'll always be some of that, but I hope that, but I hope that actually what we see is that maybe people are just a little bit more mindful of how they execute on that. And, I also hope, actually, when we're seeing it right now, that people are also discovering a little bit, what it means to kind of explore your own backyard, or kind of, think a little bit closer to home. I think particularly among luxury consumers, for a long time, there's been this sense of like, well, you want to go as far as you can in some ways, or push, make as exotic a choice as possible. And I think there is something to be said for some of the like rediscovery of the nearby that's been going on in this period. And hopefully maybe some of that lasts, because that's not a bad thing either, for us to understand what it means to explore our regions or our states, or things that just aren't necessarily so far away all the time.
Yeah, I agree. Airlines have been hit especially hard by the COVID-19 and the pandemic. American Airlines and Southwest Airlines posted quarterly losses in the billions last month, and Virgin Atlantic filed for bankruptcy, which is shocking, but nothing really shocks me anymore. And so while commercial air is starting to pick up slightly, many travelers won't go near until airlines have adopted their seating configurations and introduced more, contactless travel initiatives. You're starting to see stricter mask policies on airlines. I think, Delta says is basically putting people on a no-fly list if they don't wear masks, which I'm totally for. Emirates began, conducting on-site rapid COVID-19 testing. Affluent travelers are already concerned about, wasted time on airports, and, this post-COVID adds additional safety concerns. So do you think affluent travelers will return to commercial flying?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think, even in the affluent segment, obviously, like, private is only going to be an option for some people. And only some of the time for some of those people. Obviously, there is a segment of the market that can fly private all the time if that's what they want. But I think commercial aviation is here to stay, and I think there's always going to be a segment of the population that will need that. So that said, I do think actually there is opportunity in this period and beyond for private and for private light, or private light solutions, which we've seen, companies like JetX or whatever that do these kinds of like quasi private.
Yeah.
But I think commercial will, has to be an option. And so the question really is, what does that look like, particularly in this period, as we've seen, and then, what does it look like, obviously, if we get to a point where I think COVID is not so much of a concern in the sense that we have effective treatment or vaccine, then I think obviously there's no real barrier for commercial, to come back fully. But, in this period, I think what I hear and what I see and what I feel myself personally that consumers are looking for is as high a degree of confidence as possible in that they're going to be safe. And while there's no guarantees, obviously, I think, what I'm hearing anecdotally from a lot of folks is that the airlines that are being stricter and more careful and thoughtful about their practices are earning those travelers business,
Right.
and in this period. And I think we'll see that. I think there are legitimate positive business outcomes attached to airlines adopting good practices in this period. And I think it will also earn them loyalty with those customers over time. I feel that way myself.
Seamless, the word seamless, was a big buzzword
Yeah.
in travel a few years ago, where every moment of the journey happens effortlessly before, during, and after the trip. Now it seems like the shift is to contactless.
Mm-hmm.
You're starting to see
Yep.
hotels accelerating their contactless technology
Yep.
solutions, beyond the digital check-ins, which was happening anyway.
Yep.
And, in-room voice assistants, again, that happened before, but from the
Mm-hmm.
digital concierge bots that we're seeing to contactless temperature check kiosks in the library, in the lobby, to reservations and payment systems where guests can reserve things like beach chairs or cabanas. Is touchless technology going to be table stakes at these luxury hotels?
I've always been an advocate for the luxury industry to really, in travel in particular, to really be thinking about ways that technology can be conducive to a luxury experience. I think for a long time, a lot of folks in the luxury space really felt like technology was not so conducive to sort of a luxury experience because luxury was inherently kind of about human and high touch service. And I think a lot of people felt like the kind of sort of disintermediation that technology does was, somehow, created coldness to an experience that was meant to be warm. And while I understand some of that, and I think you can definitely take application of technology too far, I do think a lot of these kinds of things are with us, and probably are here to stay in one form or another, even after we get through this period, simply because actually in many cases what they do is actually make the experience more seamless. And I think what I've often encouraged, before I joined Expedia and after I left Meredith and Time Inc., I consulted with a number of different companies in the luxury travel space, and it was one of the things that I really talked a lot about with my clients was this idea that you want to look at where human beings add legitimate value and make the experience better for people. But if something is simply, a basic need that people need to get met, and there isn't much to do other than make it fast and easy and painless for them, then if technology can help you do that, so much the better. So I think some of these things will stay, not necessarily because people don't want to have contact with another person, but simply because they're faster and easier to use.
Yeah, we can't talk about travel unless we talk about business travel, and the massive
Yes.
pullback in business travel, inflicted the deepest economic pain.
Yeah.
Airline and hotel business models have been designed around the steadfast and relatively price agnostic expense account traveler. We have Zoom now. Why do we need to
Yep.
travel a few thousand miles to meet a client? And I don't think Zoom fatigue will motivate executives back on the plane. Where do you see the future of business travel?
Yeah, I tend to agree to some extent. I'm not one of these people who thinks that business travel will be like, dead and that it'll, it won't exist. I've read some things I've read some points of view that have taken a fairly extreme position on this. I do believe that business travel will continue to have a place, but I am of the opinion that I think it may not look like it did before, in the same way that working in offices probably won't look the way it did before
Right.
exactly. Just in the sense that we've all learned that some of what we were doing before wasn't wasn't genuinely necessary. And so, that said, I do think that one of the things, at least, this is just my own personal opinion based on my own experience. But, I think one of the things that I've learned in this period is that, it is important to have actual in-person human contact at least some of the time, because there is something qualitatively different about how you build relationships.
No question.
I find, than just doing video calls. And so I think that there still will be a place for people to come together. And I think actually, if more companies adopt virtual work arrangements, I think that could actually be a little bit of a help for business travel, in the sense that I think sometimes those people will want to come together. And if people are more spread out, if more people are working in, remote locations, there'll be a need to bring people together sometimes. And that could actually be offset some of this a little bit. But I do think you're right that I think it's entirely probable that business travel won't necessarily quite look the way it did before. You won't necessarily have quite the same level of like road warriors who are, on the road 250 days a year.
Yeah. So what do you think the luxury traveler of tomorrow will be looking for?
I think it won't necessarily be all that different than what we were seeing coming into this, in the sense that I think what people really want is, they want specialness. They want things that deliver something that feels, rich and rewarding. And, we talked about that idea of kind of the, those life-changing bucket list kind of experiences. I think for me, that's something that I'm really focused on, is this idea that travel, I think people really connect the idea today of travel with kind of betterment in one way or another. And whether that's truly personal in terms of like, I'm enjoying my life better, or whether it's I'm learning new things, or I'm exposing myself to something that I wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. I think that is just going to continue to be more and more of a motivator for people. And so I think what they're going to be looking for in travel, and this has been true as a trend, I think, for a number of years now, but I think only grows in influence, is this idea that luxury is less about, it's less about the stuff of, or the quality of the soft goods. And it's more about what is the experience, what is the thing I'm doing, or the way I'm using my time, that feels meaningful to me. I think, time, I talk about this a lot, but like, for the affluent consumer, time in some ways is their most precious commodity. And so making effective use of time is a really key thing for them. And I think that travel syncs up with that. Is it's like, if leisure time is the thing that I have the least of in my life, I want it to feel really, really meaningful.
Yeah, but do you think luxury travelers will still pay attention to detail and, having these unparalleled experiences and quality and service, but there's this new layer of trust and flexibility and safety now?
Yeah, no, that too. I mean, look, and I think the travel industry as a whole, I think, will have some work to do in the COVID recovery period. It's true now, and it will be true, I think, for some time, in kind of really restoring confidence and reassuring people that, in how things are going to be for them. I think there's a heightened importance on communication and transparency in the travel industry, and I think that will absolutely continue. But I think a lot of that stuff will just be table stakes. Like people will expect that, and then it'll be, how do you make this experience really satisfying on top of that?
Now, Nathan, I know you love to travel, and Virgin is planning a supersonic jet that will go from New York City to London in 2 hours. So do you plan on being one of those first passengers?
Totally, I would love to. Absolutely. I never flew on the Concorde, and I regret to this day I had an opportunity to be on the last flight of the Concorde, and I couldn't do it. I didn't do it, and I still regret it. I wanted to have that experience. So yes, absolutely, sign me up. I'll do it.
So Nathan, my final question is the luxury item question, which I ask all my guests. And I'm really looking forward to your answer on this. So if you were stranded on a deserted island and you could only have one luxury item, What would that luxury item be? It can't be any form of transportation or anything that requires mobile service. What would that one luxury item be?
So my answer is going to be maybe strange to some people because I'm going to say something that is not, that most people probably wouldn't consider to be a luxury item. But I think the thing I would most want is my Kindle stocked with a ton of books on it. Um, and, you know, and look, like, does it count or does that not count?
Well, if you've already had them downloaded and there's no,
Yeah,
no
right.
wireless service, you've already downloaded them already. That's
Yes,
fine.
exactly, right? Like, so, and the reason I say this is, look, like, I think what's to me why I like this as a choice for me is that look, a Kindle costs like what, $100, right? But the luxury for me of a Kindle is that I could have 150 books on it. And what it would allow me to do in my solitude on that deserted island is to have company and to use my brain in ways that would be enriching for me in that period until hopefully someone discovers me and gets me out of there.
I hope at least those books, you'll have, I'm sure you'll have Robinson Crusoe on there,
right,
and Kon-Tiki and some of these other.
that's right. But yeah, so it's perhaps not a usual choice, but it probably would be mine.
I think it was a great answer. Nathan, thank you so much. And I knew we were going to have a great show, very insightful. I really appreciate you coming on, and look forward to speaking to you again.
Likewise. Thanks a lot for having me.
That's it for this episode of the Luxury Item Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you found this useful and entertaining, I would be really grateful if you can share it with a friend or colleague. I would love it if you subscribe so you never miss an episode. And while you're there, be sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. It really helps other listeners find us. The Luxury Item Podcast is a production of Silvertone Consulting. I'm your host, Scott Kerr. Until next time.